Can Washington add Davon Benjamin and T.I. Umu-Cais in July?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click the little bell as well so you don't miss when we post a new video. And if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Lars, we got a really fun show coming out all day, every day today. We're going to talk a little bit about EA Sports' College Football 26 because I think they underrated Demond Williams, but they did properly rate some other guys like Denzel Boston, Tacario Davis, and Jonah Coleman. So we'll get there in a little bit. We're also going to talk about Washington standing with 3-star offensive lineman Pulelei'ite Primus. But Lars, the big question is, after adding 3-star linebacker Isaiah Tokyo on Tuesday, can Washington add multiple blue chip recruits this month? We need to start with Davon Benjamin.
Yeah, you can bet your Benjamins they will. I think that's a fair assessment when you look at who's on the board and where they stand. Where Davon Benjamin's a guy that part of me says maybe they don't get the commitment, they get the signature. But I think the way that things are trending, especially when you look at the secondary class, like Davon Benjamin's name just screams like DBU. Like I wrote about the Huskies by like Davon Benjamin puts the DB in DBU, and John Richardson is the perfect coach to, make that happen. And, Oregon fans will hate this, but you look at the track record, like,
sure,
it doesn't necessarily end up well, in comparison to Washington DBs. Now, are there some outliers like Davon Illinois and a few other guys? Sure. But Davon Benjamin is kind of that truly missing piece when you look at the other cornerback spot opposite Jaron Jones. They'll kind of round out that entire defensive back house, but not round out as it's another body, kind of give you a good solid, half a dozen. It's no, you get that ace in the hole, that cherry on top, who could be an impact starter next year or the year after that.
Sure. So I like where you're going with that. And it's one of those things where there have been rumors flying around that he's down to whatever different school. The one that I think has gotten the most traction is it's down to Oregon and UW, and Texas is kind of hanging around there in third place. Obviously, he's got the crystal ball to Oregon from 247 Sports, but I think that he hasn't made up his mind just yet in that regard, where we know some kids will, already have a pledge in place and set a commitment date or whatever else. I don't believe that's the case here. I don't know if I'm ready to call Washington the favorite just from what I've heard regarding this recruitment, but it certainly sounds like Washington and Oregon are at the very least neck and neck. And it's one of those things where the Huskies have done such a good job pushing over the last couple of weeks. And like you said, he is the missing piece. He is that where we talked about this a lot last year as it related to 5-star Dijon Lee, who obviously ended up at Alabama. But it's one of those things where you and I have just had this discussion regarding John Richardson since he showed up in Washington. He's done it with these mid-tier 3-star prospects. He's done it with low-rated 3-star prospects. He's done it with some of these, borderline 4-star guys. And now it's his turn to be able to prove that with an elite recruit that he can be one of, if not the best developing defensive backs coaches in the country. And I certainly think that that's something that is weighing on Davon Benjamin's mind. It sounds like Washington has done a good job at the very least putting a very competitive offer on the table in terms of everything else that goes into recruiting nowadays, and we can leave it at that. But that's something where I'm really curious to monitor that and just see what it looks like, where there's rumors going around that he might not even decide till August. But the longer this drags out and the more that Washington can just chip away at what was an Oregon lead, obviously from the crystal ball, in my opinion, that the better it does seem to fare for Washington in that regard. I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong there.
No, I was curious. Do you know when the crystal ball came in?
It was at least a month or two ago.
Okay, because I was going to say, if it's, as we talk about the crystal ball and the everydayers kind of know, if it came in the last couple of weeks, you might think maybe Washington is second, trending towards third. In this case, I completely agree, where the longer this goes, like if it was Oregon, probably would be Oregon by now. It's just kind of
sure.
That's how it would feel, where there's certain guys where it's like if Oregon wants them, and especially in this cycle, the amount of guys they missed on, like they might be willing to overextend to go get a guy just to say, hey, we need to get that look and get that PR back. in this case, I'm not sure that any PR is going to work on Davon Benjamin. It's the proof in the pudding that John Richardson can offer, that Washington can sell. Ryan Walters, Taylor May, Taylor Mays or John Richardson. Pick your position coach as to whether you play safety or quarterback. You got a former NFL guy, 4-time Pac-12, all Pac-12 guy, or John Richardson who's produced multiple quarterbacks. Sure. Either one, that's the selling point. And the Oregon one is, we know what the Oregon selling point is, literally.
No, absolutely. And that's something where I really like where you're going with that, but there are a couple other guys we wanted to make sure we got to over the course of this discussion. And one of them is 4-star defensive tackle T.I. Umu-Cais. Something I talked about a little bit on the bonus show is after adding 3-star linebacker Isaiah Tokyo on Tuesday, it certainly sounds like there's just been a plan in place for the two of them to consider playing at the college level together. So if you're obvious, I feel like it's obvious to try to do everything you can to get T.I. Umu-Cais anyway, but this is something that I think could, just in the long run, speed up his process, where he dropped his top 5 on Friday night and included Oklahoma in that discussion, even though he didn't take an official visit there, which is the one reason where, I'm looking at it right now and saying maybe he wants to hold off and try to take a trip there before deciding anything. But I look at Washington's ability to close on Tokyo and where they've stood with T.I. You talked to him early on after he got his offer, where they've stood for him for a while. And I think that this is one of the guys who, especially if you really want to get that momentum going in the right direction again, you find a way to make a late push and close on him in the next, let's just say, 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of, I guess I don't want to say I don't want to speak for you here, but I've always kind of felt like T.I. is the guy that just made sense to end up at Washington. It was just a question of, okay, but I didn't want to speak for you there.
It's fair.
But with that being said, I just look at that Oklahoma, if you're going to throw them in there, I can understand them making a pitch. Hey, if I'm going to take you back to the Eddie Vanderdoes days, where, you have a bunch of schools literally coming into a hotel room and just one after one making, PowerPoint presentations. It's okay. I can see them getting a PowerPoint presentation, but I don't see them being an actual threat. And I think Washington, the more, all the resources are there. We know that. Same thing with Benjamin. The resources are there. And I think you just, now that Tokyo is there, maybe he can kind of we talked with Derek Sammett, they're not going to lean on it, but I think there will be a natural pull for T.I. to say, hey, you know what? Let's do this. Let's make it happen in Washington.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I certainly agree needs to be considered in all this is that relationship will, in my opinion, certainly end up being a factor at the end of the day. But it's just, you talked about it with Oregon and the way they've missed on prospects recently, with the way Washington has missed on defensive line recruits over the last month or so at this point. Finding a way to make sure you can secure that commitment quickly has just become such a vital piece of this class because, 3-star defensive lineman Tom Malu is deciding on Friday. I certainly like where Washington is sitting there, but it's one of those things where, we see it in the comments from our everydayers all the time. It's you want to make sure you keep adding those blue chip prospects. And this is a great opportunity for Washington to do that. And Lars, one more blue chip prospect you and I wanted to spend a minute on is Brian Bonner. Yeah.
The guy where you're looking at and you have 2 running backs or anything. Okay. So why do you need a third? The old cliche of Jedd, you never turn down talent, and kind of in the similar mold that we were talking about with T.I., where not T.I., but Davon Benjamin, where the longer you're hanging around, the more you're there. We talked about it, I feel like almost a month, 2 months ago now at this point. Maybe it was last week, but it just seemed like if it was going to be UCLA, it would have been UCLA by now. If it was going to be throw in, maybe another school there, I just think at least it's giving that the analogy there.
So I disagree with you a little bit on terms of if it was UCLA, it would have happened by now. Where one of the rumors, and something that Blair Angulo put out the other day, is it sounds like he wants to just make an announcement in front of his teammates. And according to his report, that could end up coming in the next couple of days here as their practice period winds down. But I think that's one of those things where you said it perfectly with you're not turning down talent. Where it's why you still are able to take a commitment from a guy like Dre Pollard. And then, right now he's slotted in as that second running back. But if Brian Bonner does want to hop on board, you can move him out to wide receiver. And it's one of those things where it gives you flexibility. in this class in terms of your skill positions, and you can still go out and add a Daniel Odom if you think you can do that just to get another blue chipper name in there. Or maybe you end up really liking Blaise LaVista, a late offer who you wrote about over on Huskies Wire as well. There are so many options to make this class work, and it feels like Washington is still in a really solid spot to land some of these guys, but they just need to close out effectively, just like they need to do with 3-star offensive lineman Pulelei'ite Primus. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights just like I am, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach, which is great news for anybody who wants to maybe get in on some action with Washington this season. At 7.5 wins being the over-under for this season, I absolutely love the over. The home schedule just shapes up really, really well. And if Damon Williams takes the step forward that we're going to be talking about here in a little bit, and running back Jonah Coleman, Denzel Boston play up to the preseason All-American levels they've been listed at, plus all the upgrades you made on defense, the way the schedule shapes out is so nice. Those are all reasons that I think you should go hammer the over on Washington. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, another guy that Washington really needs to find a way to close out in this class is 3-star offensive lineman Pulelei'ite Primus. He released his top 3 over the weekend, with Washington, Vanderbilt, and Houston being his final 3 choices. And this is one where, we say it a lot. I really like where Washington sits here. It's one of those things where you read some of the comments that he's made with talking to various people. And it was, my mom's always really wanted to get up to Seattle. She really likes it. And there's a rumor, I think he might have even said it, that she wants to move to wherever it is he ends up playing college football. So having that kind of pull is certainly a nice thing. You bring him up here, and it seems like that visit went really, really well. And he's just such a great addition to the back end of this class, really, in terms of he'd be the last offensive lineman you're taking. I think this is one that Washington could certainly win out when he decides on July 19th.
Yeah, Tennessee's a nice state. Don't get me wrong. So Vandy, I can kind of understand that. Houston, they live in Midland, so I don't think Houston and Midland, mom's going to be like, hey, let's go move to Houston. So Seattle, pretty nice. And, from what mom said on Twitter, I think I included in the story that I had on recently, whereas, definitely missing it already. Like, we'll, kind of hinting, we'll be back. And, well, you're down to 3 schools. How are you going to come back? Only way to come back is if you're moving up here. And I think, I'm not saying she was saying that, but again, just, speaking to everything you're saying, where like you look at those 3 schools and it's okay, Vanderbilt, SEC, that, you could say that would be a threat, but yeah, like they beat Kalen last year, but aside from that, like, is Vandy really a threat in that regard? The Clarkland's nice. Like, don't get me wrong. I like what, Vandy can do, but I think I'm not worried about a head-to-head between UW and Vandy at this point. And then Houston, that's just in-state versus going to UW. And I think even then, UW would still win out.
Houston's got some motion on the recruiting trail recently. I got to give it up to them. They're doing a really good job down there. But I like where you're going there. The one thing that I keep coming back to in this is he is such a perfect fit for what Washington needs in this class. When you look at where it is right now in terms of along the offensive line, you've got the high-end guy who could play early along the offensive line in 5-star Cody Green. And then you have a big, really promising tackle prospect in Dominic Harris, plus a just big, physical, promising interior guy. I was going to just say run blocker because that's what I want to get to with Primus in Adiong Yang. So you have a really nice class there. And then you add somebody who just has that big physical road grading mindset that Pulelei'ite Primus does. Because when you turn on his film, it really is just a Mack truck coming downhill for a good majority of it, which is okay when you talk about, a 17-year-old who's 6'4" and 325 pounds, where, especially when you play in an offense that is from the film, 90% just run downhill out of a wing tee or something like that. Like, I think that's something where if you like the physicality and you like the size and you like where he is right now in terms of a run blocker and you want to get him in as a 6th offensive lineman in some packages in year 2, maybe you can find a way to do that. And then this is a guy who after, 2 years developing under Michael Switzer, learning how to pass block, learning how to do some of those other things, I think that's something that is really resonating with him, where especially when you look at where the offensive line is right now, you have a lot of guys who are pretty versatile and can do some different things where, I think about John Mills and starting him off at guard and Paki Finau in the same light, where if those guys kick out to tackle one day, if Jack Schaefer on the other side kicks out to tackle, I wouldn't be shocked. And I say that because it's one of those things where when you look at Primus, he's a guard through and through. If you like what he gives you on the interior, there could be other routes where he can find his way onto the field a little bit quicker if he can pick up pass blocking at an advanced rate.
And it's a good problem to have where you're looking at saying, because the run blocking is something where you can coach, in theory, but you can't coach necessarily raw aggression and just that ability to just know to go and hit somebody. Where you can coach the pass play, you can work on the technique. Michael Switzer is the perfect coach to do that for. So I can absolutely see him kind of buying into the long term plan of 18 to 24 months, so be there in contention and kind of be in the rotation, or at least have the potential to be in the rotation. And,
sure.
and this is no slight to the guys in the roster, that's the good problem you want to have, where it's, is it going to be Champ? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be Mills? Is it going to be, and that's
the problem you want to have along the offensive line.
Exactly. But it's also, if you're Primus, it's, well, hey, these guys are also going to make me better, because if that
right.
4-star and this 4-star and this guy who's going to go to Texas comes to Washington, the guy that was looking at USC goes to Washington, that's the other sell, where again, USC and Texas aren't in this mix specifically, but you're looking at thinking, well, if all those other guys decided to go play for Washington and Jedd, that's again another selling point to say, hey, you know what? Maybe I won't play next year, but redshirt freshman year, redshirt sophomore, you're talking 2, 3, 4 years of potentially starting. More than happy with that.
No, absolutely. And again, I want to go back to the point of this is what you need along the offensive line. And I know it's what people want to see happen along the defensive line in this class as well. But this is the proper way to stack a class. And yeah, it always sucks when you miss out on the higher rated guys, the Sam Utus, the Colin Campbells of the world. But it's like we talked about even before those guys committed. You're in a solid spot with so many high-end promising offensive linemen that no matter which one you get, you should be happy with the way this class is shaping up, especially when you look at somebody like Dominic Harris and how many offers he has and just kind of how you were able to win that recruitment. And then of course, Texas, LSU, Georgia, all these, elite SEC programs come in and offer him, but you were able to secure that battle and win him early. You have just the high-end development type of player in Adiong Yang, where he's really changed his body and has taken a big step forward, in my opinion, just in terms of where he was as a junior to where he is right now and what we've seen from camps and different things like that. And then Cody Green just kind of, goes without saying what you're getting in a guy like that. So if you add somebody like Primus, there are so many ways that it fits on the field as well, but it's just about creating that aspect of competition. And you talk about, just getting better every day. The first thing that popped into my mind when you said that was what Mason James told us on this show last week, where he was like, oh yeah, it's cool to be able to, go on my visit with somebody like Jaron Jones. And just, I know that they took a picture together of them lining up across to each other and stuff like that. That's all really fun. And that's exactly what you want to see. You want to create that atmosphere of competition. And with a guy like this, and just with what he brings in terms of the raw physicality and what you want to see from your offensive linemen, I think it's just a testament to UW's talent evaluation and just everything they see from just the early days of watching film. Because I remember when this offer went out, I was, okay, this is really interesting. I can see a route for this working out, but Texas, we never know how that plays out with Washington for the most part. But seeing them hang around and find a way to do this speaks volumes about Michael Switzer. I think that's really important to mention as well. But it also speaks to Washington understands what it needs to do to find success in the Big Ten. And adding a guy like this, people might look at the rankings and just see a 3-star guy and say, oh, why didn't you go out and add a higher ranked guy? This is such a perfect fit for everything Washington really needs to move forward. And I think Primus knows that too.
And this is also an ironically enough, his nickname is Prime, apparently. So, this is a prime example of the star doesn't necessarily always mean everything. When you look at the evaluation and these schools that are offering him, if SEC schools are buying it, if certain schools are buying it, and you think, all right, okay, ranking, maybe, they didn't watch him as much, or he plays at a smaller school. And again, all things Primus can't control. So, when you look at the rank, we would love to have 5 Cody Greens. It'd be great. But, sometimes you make those 3-star diamonds into a 5-star 2-3 years from now, and who cares about the ranking at that point?
Lars, one of my favorite ways to do that is just developing some of these guys is in EA Sports' college football. So we're a little bit under a week away from the early release of College Football 26. Some of the rankings and the ratings of all the different players are starting to leak out there. And they dropped a list of the top 20 college football quarterbacks in the game. Now, it's no surprises at the top. It's these experienced seniors, Cade Klubnik, Garrett Nussmeier, Drew Aller. Then you start looking down the list and you see Arch Manning, DJ Lagway, Avery Johnson among the top 20. I'm a big Avery Johnson guy. I remember getting to talk to him after his official visit to Washington, everything a couple of years ago. He's a lot of fun to watch. But I look at Lagway in particular. He gets a 90 overall. Damon Williams is still outside the top 20. And, of course, we're the Washington podcast. We're going to say, oh, hey, you're sleeping on Damon Williams. But it's one of those things where I want to get into using Washington in dynasty mode because I think that's something for anybody out there who's considering playing the game. Schools now get a small percentage of a revenue share, depending on how many players just across the nation use that particular school in a game. So it's something to keep in mind there for anybody who might be on the fence about buying the game. But it's one of those things where I look at his high end potential. I look at everything we've seen, and even just from some of the other guys on that list, there are a lot of talented quarterbacks. But in my opinion, there's no reason that Damon Williams should not be among the nation's best quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's like they're viewing. This is gonna be so bad. They're viewing Damon like they used to view Seneca Wallace, and he's not. Seneca does not deserve that strike. I believe he played at Iowa State, if I'm not mistaken. But with that being said, it was again. This is going to be the year where DJ and Damon should probably flip their rankings. I know that sounds crazy, and especially Florida fans are like, "How dare you?" and this and that. It's like. I'm just saying, you know where I've stood on this bandwagon for a while, where it's just like sure. not just the Damon bandwagon, but the concept of the hype that DJ Lagway is getting. I'm not saying it's not somewhat justified, but I look at Damon and DJ, I'm like I don't see necessarily that much of the gap that what the nation is as much as the nation is saying.
Sure, no, and that's where we want to take this conversation is there are those guys who are getting that hype, and DJ Lagway is an incredibly talented quarterback, and I do love his upside. But you're right, it's one of those things where Damon deserves all that same level of hype, and it's fun, and that's why we talk about it so much when Jedd Fisch will go out there and have those discussions because, one thing I know you're always extremely interested in the Manning Passing Academy. He goes out and he wins the air it out challenge for accuracy there. And it's one of those things where it's just as you continue to see the hype grow, it's not just the legs. It's not just the arm. It's everything that he brings to the table as a quarterback. And it's really exciting. And, for me personally, it's going to be a lot of fun to use that, just like that caliber of player in dynasty mode and help him just continue to develop all those other things, which I know is just silly to talk about these things in video game terms, but I know it's also something that means a lot to these players because they have fun with it to see themselves in a video game.
When Damon Williams puts up video game numbers this fall, he not necessarily like he did against Louisville, because asking him to do that for 12, 13 games might be a little bit too much this year. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if he does because he's that type of a dynamic quarterback, and UW has the weapons around him. So when it comes to the end of the season, when do they refresh the rankings after the season? Do they adjust?
They update them throughout the season.
Because I want to see the progression. And let's do a side note here. What game gets Damon the biggest uptick? Because we know there's going to be at least one, probably between September and late October. Which game would you pick? And I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, so I'm kind of buying you some time here. Which game would you pick that Damon takes the biggest uptick in rating because of the result that he had on the field?
So I'm going to, just to spin it for some people who might not be super interested in video games, just to spin it in terms of just the real world as well. I think we're going to see just a big jump from the Ohio State game to the Maryland game, just over those 2 weeks or so. I think that's where we're going to really see him take off in terms of, the video game numbers, and the rankings will be there, but just in terms of how he's viewed, where we're going to start to see all these things where if he goes out there and performs like we expect him to against UC Davis, Colorado State, Wazoo early in the season. But once you get into Big Ten play in those first couple games, and I feel like this is when we're going to start seeing people catch on to this. We wanted to make this prediction anyway at some point. We're going to see people all over the country say, oh, this Demond Williams might not be a flash in the pan, which for all our everydayers here, they know that's not the case either way. But that's kind of what we're going to see. And again, why we wanted to talk about this, because he's going to continue to fly under the radar for a little while longer. And having Jedd Fisch being the walking PR machine that he is, it's nice to have a guy like that have your back. But once he gets on the field this fall, that's when we're really going to see just kind of that uptick in notoriety around the country really start to take shape. And on that same note, it's cool to see that with some of these other guys like Jonah Coleman, for example, who's tied for the second highest rating among running backs in the game.
And that checks out. That completely makes sense, especially when you look at this year's crops for running backs. Jonah could absolutely make that case. I just want to, as you were saying that, you made a good point of like, how with Jedd, the salesman, the bravado, I will never, I'll give you the perfect Demond quote, every single time, no matter who you are, as long as you put a microphone in my face. And even if you don't, I'll find a microphone and tell you. In a good way, Jedd. Take that in a good way. But with that being said, it's like, how does what is missing? Because as I'm starting to think about it more, we saw enough of Demond, I think, to know, I guess maybe for the nation, but you still look at those last 2-3 games, the Penn State game, the UCLA game, both Oregon and the bowl game, that's enough to know what Demond Williams was. Now, the Oregon game was probably hey, this is what happens when he gets taken to a slaughterhouse because that offensive line was so beaten up at that point. But then the Louisville game 4 weeks later saying, this is what you could have.
Right. And you made a perfect point. That's kind of the other reason we wanted to bring this topic up is he has a large enough sample size in terms of all of the snaps he took, not just the starts, to say, hey, this is a guy that you should be keeping an eye on. And it's fair to see some of these experienced quarterbacks coming into the, like Fernando Mendoza, I feel like is getting a lot of hype over at Indiana. And then people are talking about Drew Aller, Luke Altmaier at Illinois. There's all of that hype, and rightfully so for a couple of those guys who are experienced and have been around. And it's one of those things where people are going to look at the 2 starts and no wins in those 2 starts and say, oh, well, clearly this is the case here. When you go and you watch those games and you see all the makings of, I know our buddy Christian Capel said it on Yogi Ross podcast, such an obvious star. That's again, why we keep having these conversations about Demond is all of the pieces are there, and the way he fits in Jedd's offense just makes it so easy to see what is probably coming down the road. There's no such thing as a sure thing, but it feels like how he fits and what we saw from him last year makes him as close to that as you possibly can get at this point in time.
And not to toot our own horn, but literally, as you were saying all that and making those great points, I would advise people that would want to push back and say, well, hey, you guys cover UW, maybe you're a little sensitive towards UW. Go run back any of our clips or shows from January 1st, 2022 to the end of the 2023 season when we talked about, hey, Washington, they're going to be there. They're going to be a national championship contender. Sure. They're going to be there. And what happened? Everybody by November, oh, hey, maybe we should take Washington seriously. It's we've been saying this since April. Much like the Demond thing, where I remember somebody liked the clip in my newsletter where we were talking about him in January. The Demond can be the best, overall total yardage quarterback in the Big Ten. Because of it's right there now. Again, maybe we believe the UW media relations people are pretty welcoming. I'm sure national media could come out to Seattle and check it out, and Jedd's going to talk to you. I'm pretty sure. So it's I'm just curious. Maybe this fall, maybe the Ohio State game will be that jumping off board for him in terms of the national media finally paying attention, especially if Washington's able to beat Ohio State. I guarantee you there will never be a single question in terms of oh, hey, are people doubting Demond, or who is this Demond Williams guy? It'll be oh, no, this is the anointing period of Demond now.
Sure. No, I like where you're going with that. Before we get out of here, though, I want to make sure we just talk about a couple other guys that found their names pretty high on the list of just, overall rated players in college football, where it's cool to see Denzel Boston get a 91, Tacario Davis as well. They're both just outside the top 5 in terms of their respective position groups by EA's rankings. But this is what you and I have been talking about on this show for so long. It's Washington has the high-end talent that is starting to be recognized that you just didn't see last year. And when you combine that with the added depth in the trenches, that it really does have all the makings of you have everything you need to take that step forward this season.
Absolutely. I mean, the other question, like the game guys that we're not even mentioning, the young guys, even, to a degree, where the
Sure.
people that are also going to be emerging, the players that are also going to be emerging, there's so much. It's almost just kind of like it's to bring this whole segment together. When you create your own dynasty in EA, it's like, and you're running your 11-0 going into this, like, oh, that would never happen in real life. It's like, well, all the pieces are there. I mean, again, I'm not saying you're going 11-0, but I'm just saying, like, there are pieces there that might surprise you that if you what is it, CPU, you autoplay the game, and wait, there was no way they're going to lose like that. It's like, exactly. Sure. The only way that happens is in a video game, ironically, but no, like all the pieces are there for you to have, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the biggest thing. That's the last thing I wanted to mention before we get out of here is having all those pieces in place is such a nice step forward, where for anybody out there who is doubting what happened last season, what you saw, there are still a lot of things that I believe this team needs to get worked out. I feel like we're going to see better red zone play calling from Jedd Fisch this season, just in terms of what we just talked about with the personnel and everything like that. And, people will say, oh, well, what about the defense? This needs to get better. That needs to get better. It feels like this coaching staff has done a good job, not only acquiring that high-end talent, bringing in one of those guys I just mentioned, Tacario Davis, but also just adding just the proper depth around it on both sides of the ball. You bring in the offensive lineman that you need to. You bring in the defensive lineman that you need to have to make sure that all this works. And, it sets up really well for dynasty mode in EA Sports and College Football 26, which is, just the overall theme of the segment here. But it also just sets you up really, really well to take that step forward that you're looking for in the 2025 season. And I'm just really curious to see where that's going to go. But Lars, we'll have more on that throughout the offseason. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all of you for tuning in. And if you want to make sure you're up to date with all the latest news from around UW Athletics, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.